All right. Welcome to the Special Board of Education meeting for WSD for February 24th, 2021 at 5:30. This is open session that we are now coming into, so let's do a roll call. Trustee Barnas.
Present.
Trustee Kirby Gonzalez.
Present.
Clerk Venegas.
Present.
Co-President Wong.
Here.
And I too am here. Moving to the Pledge of Allegiance. Oh, there's the flag right there. Should we stand? Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I'll lead. So, ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Let's see. Can I get an approval of the agenda? Anybody want to move?
So moved.
Motion by Trustee Kirby Gonzalez.
Oh,
Second by Clerk Venegas. Since this is live, let's do a roll call vote. Trustee Barnas.
aye.
Trustee Kirby Gonzalez.
Aye.
Clerk Venegas.
Aye.
Co-President Wong.
Aye.
And I too vote aye. E, public comments. Have we received any public comments that have been emailed to us?
None were received via email.
All right, thank you. Dr. Hildreth, have you received any public comments?
I have not received any public comments.
I have not either. Co-President Wong, have you received any public comments on this?
I have not.
Okay, moving on. F, budget development study session. Dr. Cheryl Hildreth, Superintendent.
So good evening, trustees, and to our community members. We are excited to have you join us for this special board meeting where we will discuss, give you a budget overview, really to focus on highlighting our budget, enrollment, looking at school finance, and studying the impacts for our budget, and looking at how our LCAP is designed and determined. And we have our wonderful staff who is going to go through a presentation for us this evening. And so with that, I am going to turn it over to our Interim Associate Superintendent of Administrative Services, Norma Gonzalez.
Good evening, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. And as Dr. Hildreth mentioned, this is a special board meeting to have some discussion about several topics regarding our budget and our situation within Washington Unified School District. I will be presenting alongside our Director of Fiscal Services, Kylie Lane, and also our Director of Compliance and Accountability, Stephanie Grove. So we'll go ahead and get started. We will allow for some questions and answers as we start to go through this process, but they will be within the sections of the topics of the workshop. So first, before we get to that topic, we all know as in education that we love to use acronyms. So we thought we'd put a little legend for all of our stakeholders to understand what some of these acronyms are. For example, AB, Assembly Bill, and some of the new ones, which is the ESSER, Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief. I won't go through all of them, and we'll have these presentation materials posted for the meeting minutes for later use. So we'll go ahead and move on to the next slide. And the topics that we will be discussing this evening is the Understanding California School Finance, basically provide an overview of the budget process and have a discussion about student enrollment and how that impacts our school and our budget. And of course, we'll get into a little bit more nuts, meat and potatoes with our impact to the WSD's budget. And then, of course, the purpose of this meeting is to have some planning, goal setting from you, our trustees, superintendent, and to discuss some financial policies as it pertains to reserves and so forth. And then to talk about the timeline and the development, the budget development process. And then our director of our director of accountability, compliance and accountability will give us some definition of the LCAP and accountability plan process. So we'll hop right into the next topic. And Kylie Lane.
All right, thank you. So I am manning the PowerPoint presentation as well as trying to flip through these slides and make sure I stay on course here. So this is kind of just an overview of understanding just the school finance and how we're to report to the state. So we do have the state standard account code structure, which is also known as the fax report. So you will see those when we do budget adoption, anytime we do a first interim, second interim, the estimated actuals, and the unaudited actuals. So within that report, that's where you would see the revenues, the expenditures, and then of course all the other funds the district maintains. Okay, so as I mentioned with the state standardized account code structure, the reports that we do go over, they cover a period of time with the adopted budget, which is a due date to the state July 1st, but that covers the fiscal year, of course, for the new year that we're actually presenting on. Then our first interim report always covers the July 1 through the October 31st period, any budget adjustments, anything that we're to bring to the board, any new monies that we receive during that time. And that, of course, is due to the state by December 15th. So as you can see, it just kind of has the timeline, the period of time that it's covered, and then, of course, when it's due to our state. So the local control funding formula is how we are actually funded as a district. So that changed in 2013 when we used to have the revenue limit calculation. So we use a FCMAT calculator that's provided to us. FCMAT, oh man, ask me what that actually stands for. There you go, Fiscal Crisis Management Accountability Team, I think, yes. So there's one of those acronyms. This is where we just plug in multiple components. We have ADA, we have enrollment, we have the unduplicated percentage based off the free and reduced meals. We have the supplemental concentration grants. So depending on our district, there's a 20% additional funding when you fall within the 55 and over. So there's additional funding for those. And just so for your understanding, the unduplicated percentage count is each student that falls in this category is actually only counted one time. So they could fall in all of these categories, but they're only actually counted one time in this calculation. So we are currently, as a district, we're about hovering at 68%, and we've been at 68% for several years. So very consistent with our unduplicated percentage. So all of the funds that we do receive through the LCFF are unrestricted. We do track some of the concentration, supplemental concentration with a different resource code just for tracking purposes so we can report out. It also follows our LCAP, which we'll hear more about. And then that way it's just a lot more easier on compiling reports for different subjects that need those areas, as well as department budgets, things like that. So that's part of the LCFF formula. This here, I just wanted to bring it back. I'm going to go ahead and minimize that piece so you can see the multi-year. This isn't a new slide. This was presented at first interim, but I kind of wanted to give you an idea of the state aid, and the number that's associated next to that is our object code that we report for this fax reporting. But it gives you an idea of how much comes across of our funding with state aid And then we have an EPA, which is the Educational Plan Account, I believe. It's still part of the state aid, but the state has required us to track this in a different method for calculation purposes. So, and then of course we have the local revenue sources. We have the property taxes, the in lieu property taxes. Those are pass-through dollars that we generate, that we actually pass through to the charters. And then we have the net property tax in lieu, and then the total revenue funding for the LCFF formula. So, and down at the bottom, you do see the 3-year rolling average that has the unduplicated percentage, and it kind of fluctuates back and forth, going back between kind of 67, 60, just all depends on the unduplicated count, as well as up against the actual enrollment of the district.
And I'll talk about this slide. So in the enrollment history in Washington Unified has been consistently reaching 7,500 for the last several years. And this current year when we had our CBEDs, and basically I'd like to comment that this number is a snapshot in time, and basically it's pulled from the CBEDs reporting, which is a snapshot taken in October. And the projections are, and it's not typical in Washington Unified, it's not unique to Washington Unified, it's actually statewide, where we're starting to see a trend of decline in enrollment throughout the state. So for example, this year, we can see that we're starting to see a downward trend of enrollment. And if this is significant in school finance, because in essence, if you calculate approximately $10,000 per student, if you lose, let's say 100 students, that's $1 million. So that's why we're always very careful to make sure that we count and capture all of our students all the time. It's very important to have that engagement and connection, but when it comes to school finance, we want to make sure that we have all of our kids in seats when it's that snapshot time in October.
So just in something on here too, we kind of pulled this apart so you can actually see the grade levels, which I thought was pretty cool. Just to see which part of it is actually TK3 all the way up. And then the very top piece is the Washington Middle College High School. So when we actually received them, I think when we had them on our financials was in 2016-17 when they became our charter. So kind of a neat slide.
Norma and Kylie, can I ask you a question in terms of just for the kind of knowledge? Can you remind us the days of the butts and seats and when it counts?
That would be the first Wednesday of October.
And then the fiscal is what is the spring date again? For the LCFF calculations, there's also a spring date.
Spring date, I'm not.
Because it's calculated twice.
So P2?
P2.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's month 4. Month 4 would be P1 certification, and then month 8 would be P2. So those dates kind of fluctuate as far as where they fall on the actual instructional calendar.
And we ask this because there's new board members, and then just to kind of help understand why there's a push, and there should be a push that first week of October, and then there's a second push that actually drives our LCFF unduplicated numbers with our low income, our foster youth, and etc. So there are two. There's that second number. So
and that's a great question too, because I think that what's important to know is we're funded on P2 ADA. So they look at enrollment. Enrollment is huge, which is where we get the percentage of ADA 2 enrollment. We hover around 98% is what our percentage is typically. This year, we're held harmless because of the pandemic, that we're funded on prior year P2. And we'll talk more about that, how that's going to affect us eventually in a declining enrollment situation. But as of right now, we're flat. The funding as far as is flat, but we still have to track and maintain all of that information too. So this just gives you an idea of your revenue sources. If your source is a one-time or if it's ongoing, restricted, unrestricted, supplemental concentration funds, and then it just kind of tells you if it's restricted and it's one time, obviously use that first. If it's unrestricted, use the restricted funds first, and then move on to your unrestricted. So the ongoing with restricted is used next, but the ongoing for the unrestricted is kind of like used last. So this is also just kind of the source. Two major principles is obviously with one-time dollars, you don't want to pay for things that eat because eventually those funds go away and you still have the personnel that you're maintaining for staff. So fund balance dollars are one-time funds. So if you are using your ending fund balance to pay for something, that is basically gone and does not roll into next year. So if it's ongoing, you continue to see that into your expenses, and it just compounds over and over every year. So budget restricted dollars first, and if they apply. This is an interesting slide because it just kind of breaks down the LCFF base, that supplemental concentration, our federal dollars, our state, and then our local other. So at first interim, this kind of gives you an idea of what's actually paid by those sources of funds. And then down at the very bottom, it shows you in millions what the total expenses are for those. And this was also presented at first interim, but just a different idea of how to look for it. Look at the information with the programs, with the staff, what we're actually supporting that's in our expenses.
Kylie, can I ask you a question? Because parents have been looking at this website that have indicated that we have gotten 15 million in CARES dollars. That seems to not be aligned with this 13.3. Can you help clarify that?
So with the CARES dollar, it was 8 million, and that was on restricted. So this is like that would fall, if you look in the federal, that would fall under the federal funds with the CARES dollars, and that was actually 8 million that we received. We're getting additional funds this year, and you will see that at second interim because we just heard that at the governor's budget, which was after the time we actually brought this. But yeah, just to get those together.
Thank you for clarifying, because I know that a lot of us have been getting that because it's on the Federal Register that we got 15 million.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, so just budget control, making sure that with your balancing your revenues, your expenditures, your organizational structure, your employee compensation, instructional programs, and all of your support services that you're doing in facilities. Our budget for expenses is just over 74% of our budget is allocated to personnel, health benefits, the statutory benefits, retiree benefits. So it's really imperative to have position control in place, which is we meet regularly, our department and HR, going over first the position control, making sure that it matches with what we have in budget, and staffing, because obviously if you make any mistakes in that area, it can cause a crisis fiscally. So it's just better practice to have all that in place so you don't make a mistake and have to deal with that later. So.
Speaking of position control, there is a little pie there and with the directional arrows, because it is a cycle. It is important that the divisions in an organization, and specifically in a school district, fiscal, payroll, and HR, human resources, need to maintain a very fair and equitable and also consistent practice of a position control. And what that means is you can't hire a position unless it's been a board approved position. And then also payroll will know that they're not to pay somebody unless it's gone through that cycle. So in essence, in just a very broad stroke, positions in a position control environment are assigned basically a number, and that position with the title therefore will allow for HR to recruit and then also to maintain. So every healthy organization will have that connection, because that's how you can operate and you can account for positions and budget. And I can speak a little bit more in the next slide. And one of the key components of the position control is having what's called staffing formulas. And staffing formulas, I'll just whip right through. It is a form of a process. It says staffing formulas help to document for, so that supplement and concentration and categorical funds can be used to supplement and not supplant. And basically supplement means to build upon or to add, and supplant means to replace. So there is a clear distinction between the two. And that's why we work really closely with our Director of Compliance and Accountability, because she manages a lot of the categorical funding as well. And of course, it's all kind of kept together in our business services and HR. Staffing formulas form the standard building blocks for site and department budget. So in essence, we'll work with the sites. We have annual meetings with our site principals to determine which positions we have vacant, and then we basically take the cohorts of the grade levels to project our staffing and enrollment for the following year. And it's constantly monitored. Staffing formulas provide equitable staffing standards across the district and can be used equitably to ratchet back staffing in a fiscal crisis. They play an integral role in controlling personnel costs. And I added the last bullet because in essence, we have a system of that we've started to implement within the last couple of years, but we'd like to fine tune that a little bit more, meaning for the number of, and I can share a scenario. We have a secretary, for example, in a larger elementary school, and they have X number of students rather, then the staffing formula will tell us how many secretaries or clerical staff would be needed at that site. And it's subsequent for each position. So that way we can determine based on the number of students at each site, then we can allocate what type of position or FTE, which means in full-time equivalency for that site. So that is something that we are intending to fine tune a little bit more in Washington Unified. We've started that process. It's just a matter of getting that clearly established so that it is equitable across the district. Next slide. So as we've spoken about, in order to manage a total budget, it's not just general fund. There are different funding streams and resources. So the general fund is the primary source of operating a district, but it's not the only one. And of course, as mentioned, effective management requires an analysis of all funds, revenues, and all expenses. And by way of example, other district funds that we have here in Washington Unified, of course, are charter school special revenue, charter schools special revenue, adult education, cafeteria, child development, and then there are capital projects funds, which are building capital facilities, special reserves, debt services, and then trust and agency funds or foundation or private purposes. So there's many facets to the general fund and also other budgets that we have within Washington. And then one of the key components that were required is, of course, to look at multi-year projections. We're supposed to have, as was mentioned in our first interim, and also Kylie will speak a little bit more about that, but we have to look at our multi-year projections. And of course, as mentioned, as stated here, the cause of most district insolvencies can be traced to a bad financial decision made during prosperous times. They came back to bite the district during lean financial times. So it's basically saving for a rainy day. We may have funds now, and as Kylie mentioned in that one of those previous slides, we don't want to spend one-time monies on things that eat, because that's sustainable, but the one-time monies are not. So it's just a matter of making sure that we utilize the funds for that designated purpose. And then of course, don't use future projected dollars for current year expenditures. A future recession is predicted or anticipated, so we want to definitely keep that in mind. And then low COLA environment on programs that require contributions, for example, special education, and increasing retirement, pension, serves and FERS obligations. And that is also one of our upcoming slides if it wasn't already commented on. So this is a part where we're coming to the next topic. And if there are any questions, this would be an opportune time for you.
Do we have any questions from board members? I have a question. I can't see out behind me. So if you have questions up, you're good. I can't actually. I only have one person on my side. So I did have a question. So I noticed that, our year over year of declining enrollment seems to be, so from, gosh, I can't read. From 1920, from 2018 to 2019, and then 2019 to 2020, we lost 89 students, and then 1920 to 2021, 130, and then 2021 or to 2022, 193. That number keeps increasing until we get to 22, 23. Do you know why that is? I mean, it still goes down, but it does not go down as dramatically as before, and then it starts to kind of taper off a little bit.
So like the funding for the formula that we're using for this is like prior data. So it's all like a percentage, which we're currently, just because I think of the year, this year currently with the ADA being held harmless, this model that we're using, I feel like we probably need to find now something else because it's skewing our information. So we are working with Forecast 5 on what we can do to see and look to see how we can change that model to see. But this is all based off of information that we received before with like either development in the city. So everything has a factor in there, but then it's also just prior information and percentages that are used to project moving forward.
Okay. Then you brought up another point that kind of made me pause for a minute. We're being held harmless right now during the pandemic, but we're basically going to have a full year of declining enrollment that isn't accounted for when we're not held harmless. So does that mean we're going to have to pay the piper later in a big chunk, or is it something that we would have to, I guess, right size in terms of the funding formula?
So the cliff they talk about is like 22, 23, because being held harmless now, we're being funded at the prior
at the 1920
ADA,
levels,
the 19.
right?
So then in next year, because we're declining enrollment, will be funded on this current year because it's the greater of the prior or the current. So then it won't be until 22, 23 that will be funded on the greater of the prior or the current, which will be the prior, which wasn't even in the calculation because we were still being funded on the 1920 year, if that makes sense. So it'll be a huge decline because that factor will all be based off of our current enrollment at that time, as well as what our ADA is at
So
that
it could
time
literally
reported.
be a couple hundred students.
Correct.
Not just 150.
Correct.
It could be up to 250 or so.
Exactly. Because if you look here in 1920, that's where our ADA, and not to mention this has the middle college in here, so that would be taken off as far as our actual enrollment, because that's not figured into the general fund ADA calculation. But if you look over in 22, 23, based on our projections, that's quite a bit of a decline.
321 students difference.
So when you're looking at that year of being funded, it could have a significant impact.
That's $3 million plus in dollars.
Yeah.
And I'd like to comment.
The great news is, and Norma will, and I'll talk more about this in the presentation too, is that at the governor's budget, so at first interim projections and what I showed you before, that was at a zero COLA that they projected out years. So at the governor's budget, we just got the new dartboard, the school services, which is who we do our projections based off of, that there's like a 3.84% COLA next year. So that's going to help, but it doesn't necessarily help with our increasing costs that we are going to continue to incur, as well as I think Norma will probably mention too, just some of the impacts to negotiations, those types of things. So I'm going to give you an idea when we get to the impacts of WSD, what the new revenue will look like with the COLA included in it, and then kind of give you an idea. And of course, for that second interim, I'll bring all that updated information to you, just to show you what it looks like in our multi-year projection.
That 3.84, because I was looking at that 3.84% does not equate to well, it does. It's a little bit more than a 300 student loss
I think
to
it's
our district. But
2.9 million is what I estimated it to be.
okay. So maybe it's just right at the number then. It's pretty close to it.
Yep.
Maybe.
So,
Carrie, can I ask you a different question? You said skewed, so you're saying that your projections are high or low? You use that term, so I just wanted to clarify. Like, it seems
hard
like
to say, because I feel like we put in all the information of what we're currently being we're reporting with our P2 being the 7,200 kids, but I feel like I don't know how that's doing in our calculation because it's flat. So I am working with Forecast 5 right now, just on forecasting our enrollment, because I feel like our tool, this is kind of thrown a different kind of, I guess.
It's a weird year.
Yeah, variable.
I mean,
in
considering
the
that we're all
calculation.
hearing that parents are wanting to leave, right?
I feel like once we have that, we'll have a better idea of what it kind of is going to look like. But I feel like it's doing something that it wouldn't normally do in a normal year if we were actually using data, because we're not really using data.
You're not using data.
We're using
data, but not really data.
But we're not using actual data for this year, is what I'm saying. When I put in the P2 that we're being funded on of the 72.
Oh, gotcha. So there's a funding formula, but we do have attendance though. So I mean, could we do a separate analysis of our actual P2, even though we're funded from last year?
Yeah.
Like, can't you, for our own edification, as we're developing a budget, we actually theoretically we're taking attendance. We know what the attendance is.
It works in like my calculator because they've already figured that out as far as the funding with the flat ADA of how we're being funded. But in my enrollment projection that I'm using, like I just feel like because I'm not usually using actual data and it's flat data from prior year, I don't know what it's doing to the projections. I don't know if it confidently is stating what it truly is going to look like in our enrollment projections. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, because because the theory is that you always use prior actual data, but now you're actually using flat data. But I'm asking, like, using a whole different Excel sheet, can't you just, because we know actual attendance?
I could.
Why couldn't, for our budgeting purposes, our own forecasting, let's pretend that we're not using last year's data, that if it was a normal non-COVID hold harmless, can you help us understand the enrollment trend?
Yep.
Right, that would be helpful for us, I think, from a budgeting standpoint. I mean, I get it. Like, we have actual numbers, so there's the accounting side. We know our actual dollars, but on the flip side, we as boards need to understand our actual enrollment trends. So instead of plugging into an existing fiscal tool that uses flat enrollment, let's pretend that it's not a flat enrollment and forecast accordingly.
Yep.
That would be helpful to me.
Actually,
so now I understand that better. Thank you for clarifying. But go ahead, Norma.
And I echo your sentiment, because that's critical for me and for us in projecting staffing needs. So it's really critical, because just to draw your attention to that chart again, if you could bring it back to that slide, please, Kylie. If you look at just by way of a deep dive, not too deep, but the high school numbers are increasing. Our elementary and our middle school numbers are decreasing. So what is it about that information? Why are we not keeping or enrolling our elementary? Our kinder numbers are low. So yes, it is definitely, even though the funding formula is of great importance, but it also helps us to plan for recruitment and retention. Because right now I could see, like last year, for example, we had to reduce and close a kinder classroom. But we're seeing a higher need of single subject credentials because we're having more growth at the high school. So an example could be that maybe parents, when they're smaller, will take their kids to their district where they work, or maybe the charter school might have an impact as well, and they cap off at 8th grade and they come back home. So there's variables in this data, and data, of course, is definitely something that we are constantly monitoring because it does impact not only the budget but staffing and making sure kids get the service.
That's a good point, Norman, and I appreciate you bringing that up. I was trying to think about where our kids are in the process of when Stonegate opened up. Are they now in those first year kids when Stonegate first opened up? They're in high school now, right? So that big boom of kids that waved in, yeah, they're now moving into the high school, so they're seeing high school enrollment go up. So that makes sense. And then there was a big boom in terms of kids that hit Bridgeway at roughly the same time that now is matriculating into the high school. But you pointed out the issue of the charter school. I'm just curious, do you know where they are in the process of filling up to their projected? Is it 6th grade, 8th grade? Do you know where they are in their?
They're 8th. I think they're in 8th grade.
They're in 8th right now and filling up their classrooms.
So. Yeah.
So would we then effectively start to get students back that were in our district area but left the district to go to Lighthouse, and then maybe coming to Washington Middle College or River City?
Possibly.
Is that, I'm just curious if that's going to make it from a down to an up.
We could look into that and provide that. And I think it would be helpful for you to see the trends by grade level as well.
Right. Thank you.
Can I add to that as we talk about the data? I know that if our students go to a private school, that we do not have any transfer information in the office, but if they go to a different district, we do. So maybe also looking at that to see what numbers we have of that. And I know in the past, the charters that are under our jurisdiction did give us data in terms of how many students were within Washington Unified boundaries. So I'm sure they would be cooperative to maybe give a number too. So maybe those two pieces of just looking at our numbers of what we can control.
And again, it's just promoting the kinder. I know that we just had the little announcement of our kinder registration, and we're starting to see the cohort advance of our Westfield campus as well. So that's a plus, as well as our dual instruction, our DI program. That's also advancing a cohort, which makes us more marketable. And I don't like to use marketable, but it is a form of branding to help bring our revenue back into our district.
We have specialized programs that
Well.
want to have people come here. Absolutely, that's correct. I'm actually more interested in the out years and the fiscal shortages based on trends downward in enrollment, right? Because it feels like as we budget now, it's to your point, Kylie, it might be a false budgeting narrative, right? The 3.82 we think it's going to cover, but it might not at all. So I'd love to see the actual forecasting with actual numbers and data, because I know that we all know that parents have left or homeschooled or other places or moved out of the city, moved out of the state, quite frankly. It's not just even about us. It's about a lot of different things. So I actually really want to know our actuals and our actual projections. So.
I don't have a voice today. So when it comes to making yourself marketable, using that word or that term, a program like the dual immersion program, do we promote that like a district-wide program, or is this up to the school because it's only at one school? Do we, is it marked?
Sacramento.
So
But when we pick, about, you said both? Okay.
Well, for this year, I mean, I will ask a DI parent. I'm hearing that we actually didn't market as broadly as in past years at all. So that's a good question, Clerk Benegas, because I don't know for this year because it impacts enrollment projection, right?
Right.
And this desirability of being in a DI program, which is compromised because of our current situation.
Correct.
But so that's actually a great question. I don't think
Because I'm sure
it's been
we
marketed.
have programs that are only at a certain school, but as a district, is there really like a marketing plan to bring in or promote something like a dual immersion and then kind of, go from there, right? Like, I'm sure we have many different programs that are specific to schools, but my question was just more so, is that on the district to promote it as an entire district, we are behind the dual immersion, or is it more so a certain site?
Overall, and we have our administrator and communications and outreach has been very instrumental in putting West Sacramento or Washington Unified on the map by way of promoting. We do have a wait list from what I understand for the DI program, but several of those programs do get highlighted, showcased on social media as well as on other revenue or avenues. So I don't know if Mr. Kazanis wants to make a comment on that.
Yeah, I'll value add to that. I'm just going to speak into the camera so that the folks back at home can also hear us as well. Essentially, the answer is both, and that's not making light of the issue, but it's really talking about how broadly we try to advertise any kind of program in Washington Unified. With dual immersion specifically, we do almost a tag team effort together with Principal Garcia and Assistant Principal Ramirez over at Elkhorn. In order to generate as much interest for that program, it's important to also, for those who aren't familiar with dual immersion, it's a program that runs exclusively out of Elkhorn Village. But also as the district's communications efforts are concerned, we do as much as we can to help support that. It's a feather in the cap essentially for that school to draw a lot of attention to the great things going on there. But it's also a great feather in the cap for the district as well as a great resource for our community offering a dual immersion program that's actually won a lot of awards as well and recognized regionally for what they do.
Are there any other questions before we move on to the next topic?
No, impact to WSD. I think we're all eager to know
There you go. So I
what
think
this
that
means for us.
if you want to kick off the next session.
Okay, so I wanted to kind of give you a recap of the governor's January budget and his 2021-22 budget proposal. So the cost of living adjustment that is proposed for 21-22 is the 3.84% as mentioned. It does represent kind of a compounded COLA for 2 years since there's been no COLA in the current year of 2021. So the deferrals, there is a proposal to pay down $9.2 billion of the K-12 LCFF deferrals, which effectively eliminates the ongoing deferrals scheduled for February 22 through May of 22. But from what I understand, it still is for the June 2022 deferrals. So this doesn't impact the current deferral schedule that we have for this year. So this one is for February through June of 2021. So this month is our very first month that we're experiencing the deferrals. And of course, if you recall, the February deferrals will actually be received in November, and the March deferrals will be received in October, and so on. It kind of makes a little rainbow. So June is actually deferred into July. So the bulk of our deferrals is in June. 100% of our deferrals for June will be received in July. So some of the other things that were on there were the mental health programs. There was $400 million in that with a mix of federal funds as well as non-Prop 98 general funds. And those, of course, were one-time funding. Haven't received any additional information on that as far as the spending plan on that or any of the resource accounting for that. So how actually it impacts our district and how much we would actually receive. That does have the early intervention behavioral health services in the mental health. The CARES Act, the child nutrition reimbursement, we did receive an additional 75 cents per meal that was given from March of 2020 through August of 2020. And so we just received that apportionment for that piece of that 75 cents for additional in just this month. So we're still waiting on March. They paid us April through August, but March is, I think, coming either maybe this month or next month. So there is a new COVID-19 federal stimulus package that is dated back to March of 2020. We are expected to receive those funds in this fiscal year, but we could use expenditures from prior. So that is estimated to be a little over $7 million. There was funding for the reopening of schools. This was a one-time funding for reopening safely and operations of in-person instruction for K-12. That was an additional $450 per ADA. And then there was also some additional funding for LEAs that received the LCFF supplemental and concentration dollars. The educator professional development had a piece of the professional learning, the teacher effectiveness, and then there is a teacher pipeline. It also includes the classified school employee credentialing program. This kind of gives you an idea of the federal and state pandemic funding that we received in the first set of the CARES Act with the learning loss mitigation funds, which was broken down into several different components. There was a piece that was calculated based off of the Proposition 98 funding. There was the GEARS funds, and then they also had the coronavirus funds, also known as the learning loss mitigation funds. These were the deadlines. So the very top one, the CR funds, those were actually to be expended by December 30th of 2020. We reported on those the very first week of January, and then shortly later in the governor's budget, they are proposing to extend that out to May of 31. That was the bulk of the funding, which our district did fully expend those funds. All the other ones, we, of course, we took our own advice using the most restricted and looking at deadlines and making sure that we spent those funds first before we moved on to the other ones that had a deadline that was extended out a little bit further. So this is where we talked about the ADA impact. So it kind of gives you an idea of in 1920, the full funding. So the full bar showing in the declining enrollment scenario of the 2021 actual ADA. So you will be funded based on the 1920. So that's the hold harmless where we were funded in prior. And then in 21-22, because we were funded and held harmless in 2021, you're still being funded on the 2021, or I should say the 1920 year, but really you see the cliff in the 22-23 year because now you're looking at the greater of the prior or the current ADA, the actual ADA. I'm going to give you kind of an idea of just the local control funding formula, the pots of money. The bulk of it was being state aid, which is the blue, and then of course you have the property tax in lieu, and then the EPA is the red piece. And in 12-13, that's when we used to have the categorical funding. That was with the revenue limit. That was all swept as the tier 3 swept, and then they all came across as state aid funding. So it's no more tracking of those. And this is just kind of from first interim, which we saw and we spoke on, just kind of gives you an idea of the LCFF revenue, where we were in 12-13, how it's increased, and as we're getting into the 19-20, 20-21, it's starting to go flat and slowly moving down. We did have a decrease in the base funding at first interim of $469,000, with also a decrease in the supplemental concentration, and with our unduplicated percentage of being the 67.53%. and with our ADA being 7,210.30.35. This is the projected increase of the cost for the step-in column in our 21-22 projected certificated and classified unrestricted salaries and the benefits. And the step-in column increases that we're going to see for both of those classifications. And then with the PERS and STRS, STRS has seen a slight decrease in the rate from the 2021 to the 21-22 year, and then classified seeing an increase, and then just the net unrestricted salary for all of those. So you kind of have an idea of the increase there of being about $1 million. This, I just want to give you an idea of the STRS and PERS rates, the current 2021 and then the proposed 21-22, the net change in that, and then just kind of mirroring and showing you from the previous slide what that breakdown is, looking at that change of increase.
So this slide, the cost of a 1% salary increase is also of general interest, especially when it pertains to negotiations and bargaining. Oftentimes when we're having to talk about salary, when we're in negotiations, and granted, I'm not going to go into the nuts and bolts of that, but typically when people are asking what 1% is, it's easy to think that it's just off of the salary schedule, but we have to look at the full cost of 1% or the cost with the salary and total compensation, which includes the retirement and statutory taxes and benefits. So it's the full package. So for example, certificated for a cost of a 2021 1%, the salary is $31,419,705. And then adding 1%, of course, to that, but then there's the statutory benefits of 20.44%. And then that 1% is added on top of that, which gives a total cost of 1%. So you have to factor in all of that, because this 1% just off the salary schedule is not enough. And that could potentially be a huge fiscal issue if we're not factoring all of those ancillary taxes and benefits. And of course, if there were to be a discussion of salary increases for the association, then the 1%, this would be multiplied, and it does compound. So each year that amount is not what the same amount will be the following year. It compounds to the next. So just wanted to share that information.
This, so the first interim, this was the unrestricted general fund that we presented at that time. So I wanted to point this out in the 2021, because of course this will all come back second interim with updated information as far as the revenues for the, this is the multi-year. So the years out projections of looking at revenues and expenditures. So as I was stating in the COLA, the cost of living adjustment for the 21-22 is projected to be the 3.84%. And as I mentioned, that would be about 2.9, almost 3 million more in revenue. So as you see, we already have a surplus that year for 21-22 of close to $1 million. And then in the 22-23 year, we have a deficit spending in that year with an estimated increase of revenues because of the COLA being the 1.28% of almost 1.7. So we'll still deficit spend probably about 1.2 million projected there. And then in the 23-24 year, we're projected to deficit spend about 4.5 million. And our estimated revenue increase with the COLA of 1.61 is close to 600,000 there. So that would bring us to about 3.8 million in deficit spending. So this slide will be updated. Expenses probably and revenues will be adjusted based off of anything that's changed from the time we presented this one, which was everything through October 31st until January 31st. So the November 1st to January 31st, that's the second interim reporting period. So any information that has come to us at that time, increases in any of our grant funds, you'll see the ESSER 2 funds reported in here. However, actually you won't, because this is the unrestricted side. So we can see those funds, but I will be talking about those additional dollars on the restricted side of any changes. But again, this is just the unrestricted side. Yeah, so I'm right here. So yeah, I'm opening up to questions. So any questions you guys might have at this point.
Okay. So my question is going back to the slide 26, looking at step and column and PERS and STIRS. Does our retirement play into that yet? Staff that has announced retirement, when would that play in terms of the step and column? Because that obviously will have some employees that maybe we're budgeting for. So the step and column costs for the people who are set to retire are, I would imagine, some of our more costly employees. And so how does that play in when we look at step and column in terms of if we have retirement announcements?
Be factored into that calculation moving forward?
When we have our update, yeah, I think in so mid-March, could this potentially look different?
It could potentially
It
look
could.
different, yes.
And we always estimated 2% with step and column as being our cost. But like I see what you're saying, with retirees, they're typically at the higher end of the salary schedule. And then replacing those employees is typically new teachers, lower salary. But then if they're employees that have been with us for the years of service to receive the retiree benefits, then it kind of brings on that added cost as well on a different side. They maintain our benefits until they turn 65. So it's constantly kind of moving as far as how it goes, but it just depends on position control. And I think that's why it's so important too in position control, for when we replace those positions, that we actually have the actual employee that's going to take that position, that when we roll those into our budget development model, it adjusts all of that. And so you see that savings or increase depending on how it goes. So yeah, it's a good question, because it's kind of constantly moving. So.
Okay, I have a couple of questions. So why is STIRS going down yet PERS going up?
That was a 1-year adjustment, and that was passed last year.
Is it because of the pay down from previous years, or?
So that's the PERS rate, and I think that they gave some forgiveness for like 1 year, and we will see in out years where they're increasing it back up. So the dartboard, I probably have one here for you, but I didn't provide that. I can probably find it and just give you an idea of what projections show after that year. Oh, it's in reference materials.
Okay.
So the dartboard does show that the rates, so for the 2021 year was 16.15, and then in the 21-22 year it is dropping down to 15.92, but then in 22-23 it's going to 18%.
Okay.
So there was some forgiveness, and then it kind of stays flat there for the next 3 years after that. That's their projection.
Excuse me. And then I wanted to talk about the deferrals. You know, since we're borrowing money to cover the deferrals from our own funds, how healthy are our funds that we're borrowing from?
So because we have a healthy ending fund balance, that hasn't been an issue.
Right.
My cash flow projections show, especially with the ESSER dollars that we're receiving, that's actually helping us get through this year. So I'm not too concerned about this year. But again, I'll bring a updated cash flow. But I don't see the deferrals this year affecting our district
Okay.
with what we're actually receiving.
And there's, okay, so are you considering that there could be potentially more federal aid as well and state aid?
I don't think for any more of this, like the stimulus, like the ESSER 2. So we're going to receive, I think they're passing through 90% of that. So that'll really help us for this year getting through, because I don't expect that we'll have a complete plan in place by the end of this year to spend all 7 million of that. So that definitely helps us with cash flow.
Do you have to spend it all before you can receive more?
So they're actually front loading like 90% of those funds. So they give it to you, and then we'll report. We do quarterly reports on it. But then at the end of that, that's when they'll give us the additional 10% when it's close to the end of the reporting. Yeah. Which has been helpful with cash. And I think that was kind of the idea,
Right.
because so many districts were having the issue with deferrals, which next year then we won't have to worry about deferrals, because you know the budgets, the governor's proposing that he's going to remove those. So the only month we would have to worry about was actually June. But 1 month deferral for our district with our ending fund balance
It's not a problem.
It's
Right,
not
no.
a concern at this time. So
Okay, and then so effectively, and then going to the 1% salary increase, 1% is effectively a $600,000 hit to the budget. Is that right?
yep. And so that is just the general
fund, right?
General fund. So, and that's the doesn't include cafeteria fund, all the other funds. So not that we have the only other really fund that we have staff in is Fund 13, which is cafeteria, and then the preschool Fund 12,
right?
Charter, but charter's self-sustaining. They do have a good amount of enrollment. So at this time, I think that one as well is fine. So
okay. And then you did mention that would compound year over year and then grow
as ongoing.
Yeah, as ongoing debt. Okay, and then I think that covers it. So no, I think so. We have what looks like, if we're deficit spending, it looks like we are doing structurally year over year spending into the red starting 22-23. So that would mean in 24-25, we could be potentially 8 million.
Potentially. But like, so some of this will be brought down significantly because of the COLA. But again, I think what's important to note too is that all of our salary negotiations are only settled through the 2021 year. So nothing has been settled in the 21 year. So any adjustments in there would obviously change, or any decisions that are made, whatever we decide to do for projections out years, will kind of determine what we'll do as far as if we're deficit spending or if we have a surplus.
Yeah. All right, that's all I need. Anyone else? No?
So what is a budget? So it's kind of a policy. This is the planning, the goal setting, and the financial policy. So this is where we're going to kind of get into the LCAP conversation and just talk about the budget itself. It's a policy document, philosophy of the board, the administration, and the education community. So it's our financial plan to show us where we've been and where we're going with our projections, and then looking at prior data as well. Operational guide, just administrative decisions and actions throughout the year. So any changes that we make, we continue to bring that to you at our interim reports, just so you're aware of the continuous change that we're seeing when we have the May revise, we have the governor's budget, all of that information that we receive, we continue to bring it to you so you kind of see what those changes are. Obviously, it's a communication device, so we can show you graphs, we can show you information, we can have the conversation about any of the changes that we see, things that are coming up. And then of course, going through the instructional programs and then the LCAP, planning for the LCAP. So our budget development process, we're in the middle of it right now. So we just kind of start with some of our initial financial projections, listening to the governor's budget, looking at our enrollment projections, and then looking at going through the process of the LCAP, which definitely we'll touch on a little bit later, looking to how we're going to fund those in the budget, any of the update revenues and projections based on the May revise that comes in May. And then the first meeting in June, we bring to you the budget public hearing as well as the LCAP, just the first read. And then the last meeting of June is when we adopt the LCAP and the budget for that following year. And then in August, if for some reason when we actually have the governor's budget adoption, if there's any significant changes, we do bring back a 45-day revise and present that information to you at that time. The budget development process. So we just have our revenue assumptions, and that's initially based off of the governor's budget, and then any updates with each revisions of the state budget. Our expenditure assumptions are staffing level reviews updated for the current conditions, any inflations to increase in supplies and services, anything that we see that we are planning for or have been planning for in those projections, and then of course bringing them into the actual development of that budget for that year, and then any of the scheduled capital outlay or any of our debt service obligations that we would actually hit. That's most of our debt service that is district debt is held in either Fund 25 or Fund 56. And then it's kind of a condition indicated that will set the tone for the future financial decisions. So the next step in our budget development process for the 21-22 is finish with our staff meetings and department meetings at the needs of the district. We incorporate any of the governor's January budget proposals and we do the multi-year projections. So then we will have the second interim report will be given to you the second meeting of March. We'll bring that. We just obtain the site and department detailed budgets. We incorporate the LCAP into our adopted budget, and then updates from the governor's May revision. Sometimes those come so late that we may say we're going to hold off and bring them to you at a 45-day revise, because we're already at a stopping point or a point where we've had the county review our LCAP, our budget, and we bring it to your attention just to let you know that, hey, these are some of the things that were in May revise, and we'd like to bring those to you at the 45-day revise. And then, of course, we have the adoption of the budget in June for the 21-22 year. Now I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie.
All right. We always begin with our district vision and core beliefs. We develop our strategic goals from our priorities and focus areas, and then we determine our needs and our wants. In this next section, we're going to look at how the LCAP relates to goal setting. There you go. In planning for the goal setting, we look at the database needs, input from stakeholders, which has already began with a parent input meeting, as well as looking at our actions and services projected for the next 3 years to set the goals. These actions and services are then included in the budget. The purpose of the goals and actions is to communicate what the LEA plans to accomplish, what the LEA, which is the district, plans to do in order to accomplish the goal, as well as the how we will know that our goal has been accomplished. Of course, the goals should be aligned to the metrics and be measurable. Our goals can focus on all students, groups of students, as well as cover narrowing the performance gaps and the implementation of programs and strategies to improve outcomes. So as we work with our stakeholders to develop the goals and actions, they will include the following: the why, or what is the data that supports the why, the measurement, as well as specific actions to meet the goals. As far as goal analysis, those will not be included in our LCAP for this year, as they are new goals, so we can't analyze the goals that we haven't put forth yet. So those will be coming forth in future years. And of course, we want to ensure that our budget and our expenditures are aligned for the goals. As we look at prioritizing our LCFF, the priorities and goals, we do align them with the 8 state priorities. So we want to make sure that we are in line with what the state requires us to do, and that we keep track of those with our metrics. So as we look at developing our goals for the LCAP, there are actually 3 different types of goals, and this is new for this new LCAP season. There are focus goals, which really is a more concentrated in scope. We have broad goals, which is less concentrated in scope. And then we have our maintaining of progress goals. The types of goals will be highlighted and described in the LCAP as we describe them to our stakeholders. This next slide really shows the through line in reviewing what it is that we do as we develop the goals, as we review our progress and look at what has been done in the past, engaging our stakeholders, identifying needs, developing a plan, remembering that there's some flexibility, and then the implementation and the monitor of progress. So at this point, I believe we're going back to
normal. As presented, one of the topics is to discuss the local reserves policy. And I know Carla was going to piggyback on this one, both she and I. But basically to understand the definition of reserves, and of course that's to budget the credibility and the designation of the general fund. And then the reserve for economic uncertainties is the minimum established by the State Board of Education, or SBE. And then our district are set aside and unassigned reserves. And then based on the district size enrollment, WSD does have, is maintaining a 6% based on our board policies. And there is a slide, actually it's a couple slides down, where it actually shows the amount that we have in reserves for our district. And with regard to considerations and concerns, there are several things that we as a district want to take into consideration. And then of course, this is an opportunity for afterwards, because we're just about nearing the end of the presentation, to get your input, questions, and guidance with regard to things that we want to focus on by way of our budget. The things that keep in mind are economic downturns and state level budget cuts. We've already talked about the impacts of declining enrollment and how that can impact the loss of funding. And then there could be unplanned expenses. It shares the broken boiler scenario, or refrigeration, or what have you, HVAC, right? So there's always a scenario in which we can't plan for, they occur, and we always want to make sure that we maintain our healthy reserves so that we can be planned and better equipped for that. The cash deferrals is something that we've already discussed. They will come in handy, and of course, as Kylie mentioned, in June is the month that would be impacted. Unfortunately, we have a healthy enough reserve to carry recommendation that we had done in the past was to eliminate or put aside our deferred maintenance, which I understand was about 700,000. Something to consider and to potentially seek the board's insight or input if that is something that we may consider reinstating, because we do have the reserves and the budget for that. That would be a consideration for us as a district to reinstate. As Kylie mentioned, the budget as presented does not have the fiscal impact for negotiations. So our collective bargaining agreements are settled through this year through the end of this month, year rather, 2021. So this budget does not incorporate any increases in the out years. So as we look at the budget as is, it does not factor in any salary negotiated amounts to be bargained. So both associations are subject to bargain, and salary and benefits are an article that are constantly brought forward. So that is something that will be coming for insight or input, not in public. I mean, we'll be coming to you later on so that the bargaining teams can negotiate that with our associations. It does include step and column. Yes, it does. And then debt service payments, looking ahead and what that means as far as the district, like a household has ongoing debt and the interest rates and how that's impacted. We are in a healthy position, as Kylie mentioned, and it does appear that we should be fine, but something to always keep in mind, because debt could always come back, and the interest rates of those debts can also, from what I understand, some of those obligations have rising interest rates that we want to factor in. So with that said, I
think this last slide just gives you an idea of what we brought at first interim with the general fund reserves. So at the end of the fiscal year 1920, we ended the year with a $20 million reserve. We do have the 3% that is required by the state for the reserve of the economic uncertainties, but the board does have policy to also hold an additional 3%. So we do have a 6% that we hold for the reserve for the economic uncertainties. So, and the remainder just falls as the unassigned. And other than that, thank you for listening to our presentation. Of course, if you have any questions, please let us know. And that opens up for you guys for questions and comments.
Do we have any questions from the board? Or comments?
I know that this is awkward, so I don't, it's a session, so I'm prone to turn around and talk to you, so I apologize to the public that I'm doing that, but that's just, I think, would be helpful to hear, especially from our new board members, that have reconfiguration. What are we looking at, especially in a post-pandemic investment year, right? As we develop that, I've heard different things as we look at reopening, enrichment, social, emotional. We talk about outreach workers, and those are things that I know that we talk about bringing back our reading specialists. So those are the things that I think this is the time that I would love to hear from my board colleagues. But where are we on that as our staff try to develop that in a post-pandemic kind of investment? Right, with the CARES Act or other ones.
Well, as well as social and emotional needs. Do we need additional psychologists or counselors, at least in the short term? I don't know if it's going to be an ongoing thing, but it's something budgetarily that we need to think about, as many of our kiddos are struggling, and the adjustment of coming back will also have some sort of shake up in their structure of what they're dealing with, and it could cause a disruption as well. So I think there's many different there's many different things that that are on top of my mind that I would love to see us, you know, look into and at least do some considerations of. You know, the reading intervention specialist was a heartbreaker, right? That was a hard one to let go. But now that we may have some additional revenues, that I think is worthy of consideration to put at least a couple of those positions back on the table if it's viable. And then, you know, what's the options? What are our options for mental health? So
for me, Dr. Wilkins, as you think about the strategic wellness plan and the post-pandemic,
Well, this is so awkward having, I think that we didn't have enough, not us, Washington Unified. I think we've done a really good job with our partners and the county and mental health, but just this is a general statement. Public schools didn't have enough mental health support versus, we know all this, pre-pandemic. And so just getting our students back in is not, like, as to your point, is not quite enough. How do we really leverage everything that we've done? And I think part of that is a conversation also with the county, because they have some resources as well to utilize. One thing that I think about with this is also, we know that we are paying for special education services outside of the district. So one question might be that some of our staff could look at is if, and I don't know the cost benefit of this as well, but it might be a long-term savings also, and we would get some of our kids back, is what are they leaving for? Can our staff do some of that training with one-time funds? And then we can capture that here versus paying for outside services. So that would be a question I would think of for, in terms of one-time money, that might be good professional development. And then our next meeting, our board governance meetings together, is the intention of that some of that would be goal setting? Because then we can also have a deep conversation there too.
Yes. The plan for March 6th and March 13th is that board. What are our goals? Really, what are our priorities? And really looking at everything through an equity and a data-driven lens. When you talk about training or use of funding, we look at the governor's budget workshop, and there's some monies about educator effectiveness grants. So looking at things for students and looking at things for staff, I'm thinking about trauma-informed types of PD, recognizing that our students have gone through a traumatic experience, as well as all the educators, all the staff who are coming back. So when we look at the use of one-time funds, how do we make the whole system whole, the entire system whole, I should say. And so that's a way that we've been beginning to have these conversations of what would that look like, and beginning to think about what are the areas of greatest need and looking into that. We think about Maslow and what are the areas before we can really dig into the academic core. There are the basic needs that are a foundation for children, for adults. That's our humanity side. And so looking at how do we build upon that level of foundation, utilizing the monies that we have. But I think our conversations on March will begin to help us determine what that looks like. And then also engaging with our community, engaging with our teachers, engaging with our parents about each group has a lens of what they have experienced over this last year. So we really need to understand that lens, because what we know as school and when we have set priorities in the past, it has been on a different normal. So now that we're in a new normal, we need to have a clear understanding of everyone's lived experience and everyone's perspective, so that what we do set is based on a new normal, a new routine, and it opens us up for new thinking, innovative ways to have education in Washington Unified.
Christy or Al?
So I'll give an analogy. When the power goes out, hospitals have a backup generator, right? They know that has to be set. Their power can't go out. So I'll kind of give that same analogy as, let's say something else were to happen. What is our backup generator resources in a sense? Like our SEL, our community engagement can't stop. Luckily, we have technology to where our teachers can continue to lecture and instruct. But there's a lot of programs around mental health and emotional learning that are suffering, right? Because we didn't already have as strong of a bridge with certain communities. So I would really want to see us not just put preventative there, but it's almost in building community engagement and building more of our campuses as community resource centers, having that idea of there's so many individuals that don't know that they can use the campus through, what is it called? The use of facilities. And there's so many ways that our campuses can even create revenue through the community. So I know personally that there's a lot of individuals that don't know they could apply to use the campuses. I think that could create solutions, as well as create that engagement from our parents, from our community. But more so than being able to move that into sort of that analogy of having that backup generator in case we're faced with another situation where we have to move quickly or swiftly. How do we make sure that we continue to be able to provide the services, just like we did lunch? I think lecture or instruction and providing lunch was phenomenal. Washington Unified did an incredible job. How do we then move to the rest of the components that did suffer? So I would look at that just so that we have a well-rounded, keeping the holistic education in mind, and keeping our communities and our families in mind. So I would like to see, let's talk around the idea of having that backup generator where even if we suffer something similar or less, our work doesn't stop. Our service doesn't stop and our families don't suffer. That's one. Two is, preventative care. I think our teachers did a lot. I mean, I thank you, sir, for being a teacher and being in the front line. And I think it was from not just this district, but overall, just a lot of it fell on the teachers and still continues to fall on the teachers, as they are the face, and they are also the ones providing the service day after day with the screens off, with the people calling. And I would also ask from a teacher lens, how can we best support our teachers if they are going to be the front line, to that. So I would look at how do we strengthen the support systems for our team, so that we can continue to do the work and continue to service at a high level. And two, how do we, again, reimagine our campuses, because they mean a whole lot more than just a class. They mean a lot more than, for some students, is where they get their meals. And we knew that, right? We knew that. So we moved into providing meals right away. I think it was one of the first districts that was in the front lines doing that. So I love that. And how do we continue to now open up our centers, in a sense, to make sure that we have the supports in place in case something else happens, but also we become more equitable that way, right? There was a lot that we weren't able to necessarily move on pre-pandemic. And now I think it's an opportunity to, now that we've cleared the water, we see that our teachers need more support around mental health, around, the stress management. There's so much, that I personally have been called to do as one individual. And I know that the need is there. And our teachers and our staff have all, just taken a deep breath, and you keep going. But I think that there's more that we can definitely do. So I'd like to focus on that area for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an opportunity to listen,
Oh,
right?
right.
In a way that we've never before. The crisis, like we're still in crisis, but what is the opportunity that opens up to? Right? And it's not about a test score. It's not necessarily even about a grade, right? Because all those tests have gone out the door, right? For
Well,
college
not yet.
and all that. For college, right? Like right now this year, these last couple of years, but
Yeah.
not yet. But we know that. Right, because we have a really interesting opportunity in this crisis and the pandemic to say, well, these are the investments we're going to make, test or no test, right? This is what equity means to us. This is what well-being means to us. And when kids and families and staff are well and healthy, kids learn. People learn. People want, how do you create that? In a compassionate system, education system, where everybody is seen. Does that make sense? And I don't know if this is helpful for budget development or anything, but I'm thinking PD. I'm thinking yes, that's not just for our kids, but for everybody.
Yeah. And not speaking of I had a teacher write me that she just broke down crying because they are working so hard and want to do so well. Yesterday a student read me a poem they wrote about me and I broke down crying. I mean, that's our teachers. So we have to be very careful, I think, too. I hear you very clearly about our PD, but we also need to hear what they need, because they might say, oh no, not, they're going to cry about one more PD. So we need to find, I think, to that point, we do need to find out how to lift up, but you know, one more, you know, training on mental health. I even said the other day, you know, if we hear, take care of yourself one more time, take care of yourself is making our lives a little easier, right? Lifting our loads. And so how do we do that? I think is a really good question. Mm-hmm.
But it's there.
I think to Dr. Hildreth's point, recognize and everyone's, I think we're all saying the same thing. I mean, I don't know that I have anything new to say, but I think that really figuring out the key point is going to be figuring out everyone's perspective, because it's going to be different for everyone. So, you know, some people have flexibility and haven't been as stressed out with getting kids to and fro. And some people are absolutely miserable and have fully given up on learning. So that's a very wide variety. And I think we need to absolutely be sure that we incorporate all of that, because we are, I mean, a big theme has been, how do we adapt, right? I mean, the newspapers are finally catching on, right? So we know, and we've been saying this, that coronavirus is unfortunately probably here to stay for a really long time, maybe forever. So how do we get some sense of normalcy and help our staff and our community and each other feel like we are working together and not putting extra stress on people with, you know, different ideas. I mean, I love the mental health thought. I love additional psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, trauma-informed services. I think we really need to focus on that. I think we all need to learn, including the board, to be the best communicators that we can be, and to be the best hearers, listeners that we can be, so that we can help the community, because I think that's going to be really key. And I'm curious, so I fully, on number 2, I'm curious just about sort of when we'll get the breakdown of what we're kind of looking at for developing a new plan and a new budget, because that would be helpful to me as a new board member to see more specific. I know we've gotten a broad overview, but more specific things that we're looking at and that we do, because, you know, I was at Riverbank today and it looks completely different than what Lucy's going to at Elkhorn. So I want to be sure, because we have, you know, Westfield and we have Stonegate and we have Elkhorn and Riverbank, and they're all so different, that we really are keeping in mind, you know, the differences and helping support everyone through this. I think we have a big task ahead of us, and I think we all know that, but, you know, so that would help me a lot, would be just a better idea of what we are working with, and what, potentially even what options, and help to become more creative about what options we have moving forward.
Yeah, thank you. I do appreciate that. I mean, it's always been, you know, the case where the board has definitely kind of like a focused meeting where we discuss what our vision and what our goals are, but usually it's the staff that will bring us some options on how we can achieve that. And I think some of the ideas that have just been thrown around tonight have been so valuable. I mean, they're, you know, I think all of us are on the same page here when we're thinking that mental health is going to be one of the top priorities for not just the students, the staff too, as well as parents for that matter. Yeah. I mean, you know, it's going to be kind of an adjustment for everybody in our community. So I really think that, you know, we need to really be kind of just open-minded and thoughtful, and be willing to have a full discussion about, you know, what are we looking at, and how are we prepared to move forward to make sure that that our, you know, our students and staff are going to be able to handle this new normal. And yeah, anyway, and that's enough of me babbling, but I think we have a good set of direction to go forward with.
And I think we have a lot of really cool opportunity because as crummy as COVID has been, we also have a new lens to look through, and it really does help bring community. I know as far as families are concerned, you know, of course, I don't know if anybody really wants to spend that much time with their families, but I think it really has been a bonding year, and it's been great, and difficult. And so I think that looking through it, you know, it's interesting when we've talked about students leaving, we've talked about, you know, whether they go to private school or charter school or an open school. We've talked about what we have to work with and where we're going to end up. And I think it's really going to be a good thing for us as a community and as a board and administrators and staff to come together and talk about some new ideas and how we could potentially help, because, you know, what education actually is, and how do we become successful? How do we all have equity and, you know, improve each other and ourselves, improve ourselves.
And you know what, to your point, I mean, the one thing COVID has done is taught us a new way of looking at not just how we operate, but education in general. Before COVID happened, we didn't know we could actually have virtual classrooms. We never did that. It's not something we ever even contemplated, right? We never even contemplated the thought of, hey, you know what, there might be some kids that would rather be homeschooled and have an online ability to learn through the district. Didn't even contemplate that until COVID hit. We didn't know that there's some efficiencies that could be had by people working at home or people being in the office, right? There's certainly ways, at least I found that out through my job, right? Right. So there's definitely ways that there's budgetary savings that could be had. There's, you know, all these things that we didn't envision before came about because of COVID. So we don't have to, you know, we don't have to look at it as such a awful thing, because it did teach us something. The positive side is it taught us a lot about ourselves and what we are capable of. And so I do agree that, you know, to your point, that there's a new way of looking at the world. And we can, you know, choose to either look at it as bad or as there's some good from it. So
along those lines. I don't know how permanent, we for a year or two, but are we not hearing?
It could also be, though, a way to keep our ADA. So as we think about costs, I mean, it's also a way to save. Okay. Oh, is that why you told me to turn it on?
So just trying to figure out what that investment is. We don't know, so to the degree that that's a real option via homeschool or otherwise, we're gonna have to just estimate that cost.
Mm-hmm.
And sorry, I'm a little bit distracted with the tech issues. I'm not a tech person. I'm excited. I mean, I also remember, I still want at least an extra outreach worker. Every campus has at least one, if not two.
yeah.
So that's a consistent theme. So I want at least one. I'm going to be consistent about that. And so those types of support, even a social worker outreach combo, if we can afford it. And I know those positions eat highly and normal. Those are eating positions. But I think to Sarah's point, like, how do we leverage the county EPSDT dollars so that we're hiring social workers through our EPSDT dollars? Because yes, I've done it in other districts, so can we actually make a really concerted effort to get those mental health workers on campus, but leverage the county dollars to do that? Because we have an opportunity with our MHSA dollars that we just got millions of dollars, can we be strategic and thoughtful about how that's gonna roll out for Washington Unified? I know other districts in Yolo County will look at it too, but if we can be first out
Mm-hmm.
on those types of kind of programs, because I remember when I was in Oakland, I put a social worker on every campus, and most of it was county funded. Right, and so I think we can do that with waiting some dollars.
And to value add to that, we have had Sacramento State partnerships too, where they have sent interns onto our campuses, and that we keep those strong partnerships because it doesn't cost us money, but it does support our kids too.
And that's so cool. Like that would be so effective for training in new grads and residencies. And then how valuable is it? I mean, in hospice and palliative care, the team isn't complete without that social work aspect. And honestly, it brings everything together that is often difficult and more difficult without that piece. So I think really being creative in that, I think that's a really great idea. And, you know, with the support of,
Go ahead.
That's it. With just that, with that extra support. I don't know if everyone can see inside of my brain what I think that looks like, but
I think I get it. I think where
Yeah.
you're going with that. I was just going to ask, is that a program that we put a halt to because of COVID?
I don't know if there's a halt to it.
When we brought the Sac State students in for the, they were in their master's program, weren't they? Their MSW program?
I don't want to misspeak to what they do, but in terms of whether they are under the lens of social worker or under the lens of, I don't want to misspeak how to speak to it, but it's absolutely mental
Okay,
health.
the Sac State program, do you know, Norma?
Not specifically about the social work programs, but we still maintain our partnerships with the universities, and we are onboarding and have onboarded our interns. Kylie in her presentation shared about the classified pipeline program. That's something we also need to explore because we have a lot of classified staff that have their undergraduate degrees and could potentially move into the teaching or other programs within our district. So I'm a key proponent of looking within, because if we have current existing staff that have their degrees and they want to move into as a pipeline, right? So
Yeah.
something we can pop into as well and explore.
Can I ask then for timeline to make sure I understand this, and to also Trustee Barnes' point of thoughts is that we have our own board governance meeting where we talk through some of our strategies and goals. And then of course there's the LCAP that it's had a lot of work. And so would the correct path to be thinking through this be that we have our meeting coming up, we look through the LCAP and we see how those align as we think about moving forward? Is that, and that how that relates to the budget? Is that an appropriate way to think about that?
I'm gonna yell because I'm not sure if anybody's hearing, but it'll pick up either on Christine or Sarah, so I apologize. I apologize because I'm not yelling at everybody, I'm just trying to project my voice through a mask. And I'm sure this is comedy afterwards on YouTube and my children will laugh at me. And so I am wondering if we can have another budget session after governance to actually do those in detail with the LCAP, right? The full design, so that we understand where our board priorities are and then align that accordingly. So this, I don't see this as a one and done budget session per se. It's going to be a multi-year budget session. And the counseling program that Trustee Pizzotti was talking about was, again, learning from our charter school partners, is they had a counseling center that brought in counseling interns. And we were wondering whether or not we could do that. I mean, again, as a school-based social worker, we do the same thing as teachers. We have interns and we supervise them. We have a lot of good credentialed social workers. And I, again, for me, like Sarah, I don't like to kind of direct things, but you can actually supervise 10 interns with one PPS credential, right? Like there's a possibility to kind of grade that and be really cost effective with how you actually implement such programs.
And so valuable.
We have, last year I saw on campus, we were in Washington by doing that. I know we were doing Ridgeway Island.
Yeah, but if we can be strategic in our plans about this is, we're actually funding a position that's credentialed, is gonna supervise X number of interns on X number of campuses versus, you know, the university will call and say, can I get a placement? But if we're extremely explicit and we can put even a couple of $1,000 stipend or $2,000 stipend for bilingual or whatever, that always entices people to choose you, because school social is always looking for more placements.
Always.
Right, and if we have a good, solid program, it'll be better that way. So there is a budgetary item on that, so you can, anyways. And then you can also leverage the EPSDD dollars even with the interns. So, that's all.
The which dollars? The,
Early periodic,
oh, E.
EPSDT,
I thought you said you.
screening, DT.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can look it up.
Keep getting texts. Jackie's mic isn't working.
Oh,
That's
I'm
okay.
trying to.
I'm yelling. It's okay. I switched to my computer, and that's okay.
All right.
So we will bring back a timeline, and as I think that's a good suggestion of once we have our governance workshops to then, I think there's a lot of community engagement that needs to happen, that our staff, our parents, and really I would like to add the voices of our students, because that it has really been a missing voice in lived experience. How are we know as parents what our students are going through, but we need to really take the opportunity to ask in student-friendly, child-friendly language, what has worked, what has not worked, what would you like school to be when you return? Just some very open-ended questions, and really then gearing to, okay, that's going to help us determine what we need, hearing it from each person. And so as I think about creating that timeline, it is going to require us to come back and have these discussions, but I think our discussions will be more meaningful, and we can be sure that we are representing all of our stakeholder groups if we invest in that time to listen to what's on their minds, what's in their hearts, and what's in our pockets. Like, what can we do? And then creating that really common needs assessment and laying out, these are all the things that we heard. Now, what can we do? What can we prioritize, or thinking some different ways if we're thinking about counselors at every school? I don't know what the budget is going to say, but it could be perhaps we have rolling counselors and you're going to build capacity in some type of training. If we talk about restorative practices as an example, and you have a restorative justice counselor at a school for a year to build that capacity, and then that person goes and works with some other schools the next year. So really thinking about what are the needs, what can we afford, but still have an overall plan that will accommodate everyone, just knowing everyone may not get the same thing at the same time.
All right. Is there any other comments from anybody else?
Thinking of mental health, maybe we can discuss at our, we can't because it's not agendized, but thinking of mental health, because it ties into this conversation, there might be a way to lobby on our lens that the state does a waiver for state testing, because our very precious time that we're going to get our babies and kids on campus, we want to make sure that we're not stressing them out with weeks of testing. In fifth grade, it's 3 weeks on a typical year. So
Wow.
it is not.
Didn't Tony Thurman say that, I thought it came out yesterday.
He did, but he came out that he did not agree with the federal government's stance on testing.
Right, and that there was an announcement that Tony Thurman was suggesting that there needs to be a waiver of testing for this current school year, and that there was going to be a committee discussion about it today. So I'm interested to find out, well, what happened at the committee meeting, so we will know what that means for our students and staff.
I'm on my phone now, Yorgos, and it looks like I'm turning green. So I think I'm being heard. So when you talk about committee hearing, Dr. Hildreth, is it in the U.S. Congress? Because ESSER, the waiver I think Tony Thurman is also talking about are those testing requirements at the federal level, right?
I'm not sure. I would need to go back and look at the communication that was sent out yesterday to have the details.
Yeah, I think that's the waiver request to the feds to waive our state requirements, so that, because if you look into our budget, you get a significant amount of money from the feds, and those are all contingent currently on testing, right? So I don't know what percentage it was, Kylie, but it was significant.
And states can do waivers.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
All right.
Or they can just do waivers for the entire nation.
That would be great.
That would make sense.
I lobby for that.
That would make absolute sense.
I lobby for that.
Because I can only imagine what our testing scores are going to look like compared to
Well,
previous
it's
years.
more too about just the time. We have such limited time with
Right.
our children right now, less than we've ever had. And so with your very limited teaching time and learning time and trying to meet their social emotional
Right. And if,
peaks of that is not going to, the benefit of data is, I don't think, going to pay off.
well, yeah, and especially when people have the learning loss mitigation that the feds are providing and the state's providing, you know, what is really necessary is time, right? Time is necessary, not testing and getting more data points to see where we are. We know that we're not where we were, and we just need to be able to make that up with time, and that's the only thing that can heal that problem. So
I also want to be mindful that we have taken a stance on equity, and so I agree with waiving the test. There needs to be another metric that we're really being cognizant and we're accountable to our plan and our commitment to equity. Other things that I know that we pass as a board, the number of kids engaged, the number of kids who are taking AP. Like, there are other metrics that I would love for us to go back to and say, even if it's not a test, these are the things we put in our plan and we stick by those equity metrics, right? Because I don't want to lose that conversation because we've been so driven by the test that, like I said, it's a different opportunity to look at different things when we think about equity.
right.
We did approve also the iReady that they took as a data point. Again, we don't have a last year to compare to, but
I will say I've heard that doing iReady was not like in a pandemic. This being the first year that we started that, I just going through my daughter's IEP meeting today, I found out that, you know, doing iReady she's in 3rd grade, put her in 1st grade, right? Doing it in the middle of a pandemic over a computer where, you know, it just wasn't a good time to do it. But I think you're right to your point that it will be helpful in future years, in out years, but this was probably not the best year to initiate it. Maybe for a baseline level, but yeah.
Our specialized programs, English language learners, I know that those are unique magnet type of programs that we should, I don't know. I mean, again, let's talk to staff. And like, I feel like I also hear like staff is overwhelmed, and I'm like, it's hard for me to like, and do this more, right? So, but we do need to hear from staff and just, and I'll just say it, like our immersion program isn't what we intended it to be. Our English language learner program isn't intended what it was. What is it that we need to do with it? Both our ELL, and we made major ELL investments, major. Right. How do we build back better from that? So.
And it's gonna look so different. I mean, and that's why, again, the testing, however we do it, is gonna come out completely different than it used to. Everything is different. And so, yeah, that's where we really have to be mindful of all of those things and not, you know, lump them in.
So is there any other questions? Al, Sarah, Jackie,
I
Christy?
think the mental health of our staff, we can work on not going so late.
Right?
And let's give them a big round of applause for all the work that they did. Thank you. And I know
It's only
setting up this room-
7:30.
Hey, we're giving them a 21-minute break, all right? All
And now
right.
they get to see me live in comedy in person.
Your comedic wit is appreciated by your fellow colleagues, but maybe not necessarily by staff as it's taking us into the night. All right. If there's nothing else, staff, anyone? Okay. If there's nothing else, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Moved by Trustee Kirby Gonzalez,
I'll second.
second by Trustee Barnas. Clerk Venegas,
Aye.
Trustee Barnas,
Aye.
Trustee Kirby Gonzalez,
Aye.
Co-President Wong,
Aye.
and I too vote aye. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.